So now we're going to move on to some other aspects. Dustification. So some people think you have to use, fancy scientific-y sounding terms. Well, if you use a word that represents a known phenomena, and you don't know what the phenomenon is, then you're not being scientific. If you use pulverize, no, that's kind of a grinding. The building really wasn't ground up, it was turning to dust in midair. We don't have a word for that. We've never seen it happen before. A new word is needed. And it also keeps you from biased observations. If you see all this dust in the air, or whatever it is, this hazy stuff, the fuming in the air, and you call it smoke, you're assuming fire to be the cause. And that causes you to bias your observations. So I deliberately pick words that you're not going to confuse with anything else. Sometimes I use Cheetos, snack food. And I think you call them Whatsits here. There's things that look like Cheetos in the ground. They're obviously not Cheetos. You're not going to confuse it with it, but it's a placeholder for some odd characteristic until I discover what it really is. So dustification is a word I use to describe what happened to the buildings. We saw this picture before, how these steel columns, as they're falling, are trailing opaque amount of dust. Kind of looks like an Alka-Seltzer tablet. So I've often said that, Alka-Seltzer is this rigid object until you drop it in a glass of water. It effervesces and dissolves. You've changed its environment. Well, steel is normally a rigid object. Maybe if you change its environment, it effervesces and dissolves. What happened to its environment? Something strange. Often people see these, they call those squibs. I call them squirts. You can see it just kind of dissipates out there. It doesn't go very far. It can't be a bomb going off. It can't be in excess of the sound of speed, the speed of sound. But one thing, a building this tall has water tanks every 10 or so stories, because you can't pump water all the way to the top to 110th floor. A quarter of a mile up, there's too much of a head to pump against. So they pump it up in stages, like 10 floors at a time. So they have various water tanks all the way up. And you wouldn't want to use the corner office for that. It makes sense they would be in the middle of the floor. And if you're turning the building into dust, water tanks are a pressure vessel. If you weaken the walls of that pressure vessel, at some point it's going to give way. It's not going to be able to hold in its pressure. I don't know for sure what this is, but that to me seems like it's the most likely. At regular intervals, you see these squirts coming out. To me, it looks like a bunch of water just cutting loose. But thinking about those squirts coming out, if it was air, you should have a whole lot more air coming out. If you get that building to the ground in 8 seconds or 9.5 seconds, think about the time it takes to get all of the material inside pulverized, mix with air, and squirt everything out of the way in order to get it down to nothing. That material's got to go somewhere. So if this is coming down at a speed of, down to the ground in like 9 seconds, plus or minus, it has to squirt out of there. The average speed has got to come out of there faster than Mach 1 at this point. And actually the air from the center to get out of the way is like Mach 2.5 by the time it gets to the ground. So all of the adjacent buildings should look like they're machine gun fired from all the stuff coming out there faster than the speed of sound. It should make loud noises. But it was silent and there's very little squirting. We saw a few squirts coming out. We didn't see much else. But people said they heard explosions. Well, you put an egg in your microwave oven, you'll hear an explosion. Bombs do go boom, but not everything that goes boom is a bomb. The firefighters have these air tanks that they wear when they go into smoky areas so they can breathe. They were found to be exploding at street level. Interesting. Also, folks think that, okay, the building was wired up with bombs, bombs in the building. If it was wired up, how are you going to coordinate all the wiring? And then folks will say, well, it was remote controlled. Either way, have you ever been to a blasting zone? You know, blasting zone had turn off cell phones and two-way radios. How do you get everyone in Manhattan to turn off their cell phone? Of any place in the world, I can't imagine a higher concentration of cell phones, except maybe Tokyo. But there were booms, and these Scott tanks were found to be exploding. There's quite a lot of testimony from the first responders. We don't need to read it here, but there's various comments about they're all letting go. They're all, going boom. This one, particular one I like, is boss asked him, "Did you lose your vehicle? Huh? Was it on fire?" "Fire what?" "We saw the sucker blow up. It went boom." His vehicle exploded. So here we're going to focus on the details of the dustification. There's going to be, here's the northwest corner. There's going to be an object coming down. And we're going to look at it and see what it's doing. There's a steel beam. It's emerging soon. You'll see it trailing dust and then kind of turning. I think that's it. And you'll see it just kind of melt. Here it is. Yep. Well, it's trailing the dust. Now watch it just disintegrate. You think of all that material coming off of it. There's nothing left to it. This is the Verizon building, and we're going to go look on the ground right below there to see where the stuff should have landed. And you get big chunks here coming down. What is all that material trailing off of it? I wonder why there's no thud. And this is at full speed. Again, you see that chunk coming down. Just turning to dust. So let's go down and look in the ground right below there where that stuff would have landed. And this was in front of everyone, but they were told collapse, so that's what they saw. Here's that Verizon building, and right there is where that stuff should have landed, in that intersection. There's paper and aluminum cladding. The steel structure had aluminum cladding covering it, and that is just a few pieces is all that's left. Why is the paper not burned? And notice the body language. This guy has his hands on his hips, arms folded, hands at the side. You can imagine their jaws probably hanging. They've just come out of their hiding places to find the building's gone. Big 110-story building, and you're seeing sunshine. There's some more dustification we're going to look at of a particular part of the building. Remember where the folks were in stairwell B? I think this is the upper part of that. They were some very robust, beefy beams, columns, and I think that it's interesting that they took a little bit longer to go away. There's viewing angle from here, just various directions. The car park, it's that image over here is looking at it this way, but we'll look here, and then across the river. From the north, watch this column here. Watch it faint. Just faints into dust. Now this peels like a banana. And you see immediately you have clear air around it. My detractors often say, well, the thing fell over and it had dust settle on it, and the dust fell off, and it's so fine it hangs in the air. Well, how could dust settle on it instantly? It hangs, and then you see it frothing up into dust. But this sequence here is really creepy. It starts off very crisp outline, and then pretty soon it's hazy. If this thing fell over, and the folks who say that the dust was so fine it hung in the air, how did it settle to begin with? Or you have another problem, the dust, coarse dust settled on it and became fine dust. Whatever way you look at it, there's a problem. Even if you have this is 700 feet tall. If you have a 700-foot deep hole in the ground and drop that thing down, it wouldn't do this. If it fell over, it'd take out a few city blocks worth of buildings. You'd see it on the ground. It's not there. It turns to dust in front of you. A view from the northeast. See how crisp it is. Poof. It's another word I like to use, poof. Describes. And we'll look again at a close-up of this. See how it's very crisp around the edges. Also, how do you get dust landing on a vertical column? I think that was right above where those guys survived. You can almost see the wires hanging out of what's left. Then it turns to dust. Here's something else. But see, there's some columns there, and then they go missing as it comes. This is closer to the ground. And you will also see over here where dust is shooting out of the ends of those beams, or the columns, and it's starting to look like tissue paper. There was very little of that material that reached the ground.
The towers didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground. They turned into dust in midair.